At the time of these events, I was only about 14 years old. I had never been as far as a few miles away from my home, with the exception of staying at a friend's house. However, today I felt the need for adventure. It was around sunset when I ventured out into the flat marshlands of Alviso, my hometown. I was supposed to meet up with a few friends an hour earlier to gather a team to explore what some refer to as a ghost town. Keep in mind that up to that point in my life, I was never too superstitious and into paranormal things. They only seemed like things for TV screens. Anyway, my friends never showed up, so I was left to venture on by myself and my small dog Zero. I packed a backpack full of water, a sandwich, some dog treats, and of course a flashlight and pocket knife I had taken from my grandfather's garage. After walking about a mile from my house into the marina, Zero and I began on the trail that supposedly led to where the ghost town was supposed to be. In my head, I was a bit doubtful, wondering if this supposed ghost town was just a hoax or a local myth. Fast forward a few miles down the road, and I noticed that it's quiet. Dead quiet. There were no crickets or birds, just a small breeze brushing over the tall grass and water beside me. The trail was lit by moonlight and my flashlight. It was so dark. The trail was a levee, with water and marsh on the other side of me as far as the eye could see. I saw a broken bridge in the distance, and I began to get a little more hesitant. I started thinking, what if it breaks while I'm on it? What if the ghost town really was real? And what if I'm never seen again? I looked down to see Zero wagging his tail at me, and this calms me a bit. We make our way to the bridge. We cross it safely and walk a few hundred more yards before my heart skips a beat. In the distance is the silhouette of a few small houses that looked demolished. In order to get to the houses, there is another newer bridge that is there only for the Caltrain to pass on. The bridge is pretty big, so I'd have to jog across to ensure that I don't get hit by the oncoming train. As I start walking, both me and Zero get a bit weirded out by the place, and I have a super strange feeling in my gut, telling me to get out of there. I ignore it and I push on. I finally reach the other side and the houses are in sight. All of them are in ruins, wrecked from the flood that overtook Alviso some time back. This was all that was left of what was once known as the town of Drawbridge. I make my way over to the houses, and though it sounds impossible, things got more silent than they were before. Whatever breeze there was now gone, and the crickets and birds were beyond absent. I could actually hear my heartbeat. I shine the flashlight in front of me and make my way into one of the houses. It's really creepy, with "Welcome to Drawbridge" graffiti on the wall. All is normal until I see frantically painted words in the wall that say, "Home of the Sheep Man." I get weirded out, and I'm about to leave when another bunch of words catches my attention. I shine the light in them and my heart drops. "Don't let Mr. Celine follow you home." And that was all I needed. I was ready to get out of there. Just then, Zero began to bark. Not just a regular "I saw a squirrel" kind of bark. I'm talking a defensive, ready-to-attack bark. I pull him back from whatever he's barking at, and I tell him to quiet down. Probably just a rabbit. He's pulling harder than I ever thought a small dog could. He's barking toward the back door, which has an open view of the marshland and tall grass behind the house. And that's when I see it. Standing no more than a few hundred feet away is a naked sheep. But it's large, far too big. I back up slowly and step on a broken piece of wood. The noise catches its attention, more than Zero's barking. As soon as it sees me, it stands on hind legs in a very humanoid way. I can make out from the distance that this thing was tall, taller than me. It's just standing there looking at me. Zero barks again with a bit of a whimper. This thing lets out the most bone-chilling screech you could ever imagine. You could compare it to the cross between a child and the tires of a car stopping abruptly. Its mouth opens slowly, and out comes my voice. My own freaking voice. But the tone of it just seems off, like it was being said through an old radio or something. It says, "Come here, Zero. Come play with me." Then it starts to walk toward us. Its stride is robotic, but at the same time it sways back and forth like a drunk man. It's getting closer to us at an alarming rate. I grab Zero and I bolted out of there. I don't look back, and I could swear I could feel something ice cold touch my neck. I started to smell rotting flesh, and I swear I was about to puke while running. My adrenaline is the only thing that kept me moving. I got to the broken bridge, and I tossed Zero to the other side. I jumped onto the bridge and it snapped underneath me. I could still walk on it though, so I hurried across. At this point, I realized that I had dropped my flashlight while running away. I looked back. Big mistake. It's standing there on top of the house I was just in. Just standing. Even though it's crazy dark, I could feel its eyes looking back at me. I keep running with Zero all the way home. By the time I reach my house, it's already almost 3 in the morning. I told my mom that I was going to a friend's house, so she didn't bother knowing where I was. I got inside and put Zero back in the backyard where he stays. I crawl into bed and I leave the TV on that night. It takes a while to go to sleep, but I was finally able to, only to wake up to Zero growling again. But I'm too tired at this point to be alarmed. I wake up the next morning thinking it was a bad dream, until I see the scratches on the back of my neck. I told my friends the story and we all agreed that if we ever go again, well, if they actually go with me next time, we must go during the day and we have to stay together. Ever since then, I always sleep with my windows closed and lights on, in fear that one day I'll see that thing again. I still check the backyard before I sleep. I don't know what this thing was. I don't know if this thing was Mr. Celine or the sheep man, or if they're one and the same. All I know is that I never want to see it again. Last year I was watching a few creepy videos about Native American horror stories when they described something that made me freeze. It was of a twisted creature capable of turning into animals that hunted us for fun. It described the creature I saw a few years back in perfect detail. I believe now that what I saw that night was some sort of Skinwalker. I wish I was making this up. I just wanted to share my story so that people may think twice before going out there by themselves, especially at night.
I've really never been one to believe in the paranormal or supernatural. Sure, I believe there are certain things out there that have yet to be discovered or explained. To be honest, I've never put too much thought into the idea of ghosts, ghouls, or bizarre creatures of the unknown. To me, these have always been things that I thought were interesting to talk about, but were simply people misinterpreting something they saw, or were false memories or hallucinations. That is, until I had my own recent encounter with something I could not explain. Now I don't know what to think. I've always been fascinated by space, which led me to taking up the hobby of stargazing. On clear nights, I would often venture outside in the late hours of the night to look at the constellations, the moon, and the occasional planet because in the suburban area in which I grew up, these were the only celestial bodies that I could usually see through the light pollution. For years, all I have ever desired was to see the galactic core in the night sky. It wasn't until this last summer, at the age of 22, that I was finally able to fulfill that desire. I'd come to an arrangement with my grandpa to go stargazing down at his farmhouse. He agreed, and also suggested that the next day we go fishing, down at one of his new fishing ponds. So in late August of 2016, I set out from my grandfather's farmhouse out in the country several miles away from any major city, making it the best place for me to see the galactic cloud. I set out with my dog Juno to keep me company during the night. Juno is abnormally large. She's an Alaskan Malamute Siberian Husky mix who is completely white with striking brownish-yellow eyes. They give her the appearance of a large white wolf. She looked both menacing and beautiful, but was really just a wimp. I also set out with my telescope, which links to my laptop to take pictures, and my fishing gear. I was to spend the night at my grandfather's farmhouse by myself and stargaze until dawn, when he would drive down to the farm and we would go fishing together. The farmhouse is a small 2-story wide house in the middle of nowhere, guarded in the front by a metal fence that extends along the road to a gate. That gate blocks a small gravel driveway that branches off from the main road. The driveway bends around the farmhouse and leads to a very large metal barn about 50 feet from the main house. In between the barn and the house stands a large post with a transformer hanging from it, and an old rusted oil drum that was used as a sort of trash can now. The transformer is attached to a wire that shoots underground to the power lines of the main road, and from this transformer there are 3 power lines extending to the farmhouse, the barn, and a third building, where my grandfather kept equipment for the hunting season. This building was located at the curb of the gravel driveway that led to the barn. Parallel to the driveway, there is a dense forest of trees that ran along the driveway up to the end of the third building. And at the end of that building, the trees curve around, extending outwards toward the barn. The forest then curved around a field that had about a mile radius until the field gave way to even more forest. The barn, though, was always the most fascinating part of the farm to me. I would describe the barn as a temple to the hoarding gods, packed to the brim with both useful and useless crap. That included a variety of vehicles, a lot of which were broken down due to a lack of maintenance and general disrepair. The entire back wall of the barn had shelves that extend all the way to the ceiling and was covered in enough wooden chairs to seat 3 large wedding receptions. The shelves along the left side of the barn were full of hundreds of metal card chairs, tables, arrow targets, and miscellaneous junk. The right-hand side of the barn had workbenches lining the wall. The workbench that was the deepest in the barn, I believe, was once used to process the meat and hide of animals after a hunt during the hunting season. Due to the abundance of deer skulls, dry bloodstains, rusty knives, antlers, pelts, turkey feathers, etc. I finally pulled up to my grandfather's farmhouse gate that late August weekend, having about 90 minutes worth of sunlight left. I used the key Grandpa gave me to unlock the padlock and unravel the chains, allowing the gate to open and let my car drive through. And once I drove through, I closed the gate, not bothering to rewrap the chains myself. I drove up the driveway to the farmhouse, and I let Juno out, and she took off sprinting around the farmhouse, excited to explore the new place. She knows not to venture too far, but I made sure to keep my eye on her to make sure she did not run into the road or anything like that. I went inside through the back door and disabled the security system. I then went out to the barn to find the fuse box, and then I disabled the motion-sensitive spotlight. Then I searched the barn for some flashlights, and I soon found several. I came out, giving 3 sharp whistles, which was my call for Juno. She came running out from the front of the farmhouse, but as she approached me, she ran right past me, running between the barn and the building with the hunting gear towards the tree line. There was a flock of wild turkeys near the tree lines, and Juno thought she needed to investigate. "Juno, leave it," I shouted in a stern voice. She stopped, not taking her eyes off of the turkeys, and let out an audible moan, as if to protest. "Juno?" She then ran to my side. I brought out a table from the barn and began to set up my gear around the table. Juno kept her eyes on the turkeys the whole time until they had moved out of sight. By the time the sun had completely set, Juno had run herself to the point of exhaustion and was now sleeping soundly on the back porch of the farmhouse, keeping watch over me and my telescope. I was inside the farmhouse, trying my best to fix the flashlights. The batteries had become corroded and messed up their insides. It was a pain, but nothing a little still wool couldn't fix. But after about 2 hours of trying to find the still wool, cleaning the flashlights and finding replacement batteries, I finally had 3 working lights. I took the flashlights and my laptop outside with my telescope, and I was surprised to hear how loud it was outside. Bugs of all kinds chirped vigorously, coyotes howled in the distance, owls hooted in the forest, and several other creatures made countless other noises. I turned on the 2 bigger flashlights, and I used them to light up my little camp, while keeping the third on me. I linked the laptop to the telescope and aimed the latter at the desired section of the sky, and I began taking beautiful pictures. Thanks to the darkness, I was able to see things I was never able to see before, which had me engrossed with the stars for several hours. It must have been 1 in the morning, and I suddenly got an unnerving feeling. Something in the air had changed. This change was significant enough to break me from the trance of my work. That's when I realized I could no longer hear the chirping of the crickets, the howls of the coyotes in the distance, or the various other noises of the night. They had all suddenly stopped, and it was very unnerving. I took out a flashlight, and I shot it into the darkness around me to see if I could spy the cause. My heart was pounding. I expected to see the glowing eyes of a pack of coyotes, or a mountain lion staring back at me. After a few heart-wrenching moments, I realized there was nothing in my immediate vicinity. I began to calm down after this and decided it was probably time to call it a night. I shut off my laptop and was about to go inside when something caught my eye. It was in the tree line roughly where Juno's turkeys had been. Something else was there now. It was right within the tree line, and whatever it was, I could not exactly make it out, but it was something pretty big, and it had a gray-white color to it that seemed to cut through the darkness like a knife. Something about it unnerved me so much, I made my way to the barn and turned the motion sensor light back on. This lit up everything between the farmhouse, the barn, and the hunting storage all the way to the tree line. When I emerged from the barn, I peered back over to where I saw the whitish mass before. It was still there, completely unmoved. This sparked my curiosity. That was not there earlier. Surely if it was an animal, the light would have made it move by now, right? Cursing my inquisitive nature, I started off toward the object flashing in tow. I get right up to the tree line and shone my flashlight directly at the object, which I realized was about 6 feet into the tree line. Startled, I jumped back at what I saw. At first glance, I thought it was a person, but after a brief moment of observation, I realized that there was no way in hell this thing was human. When it did not move, I thought it was unconscious or dead, but I dared not approach. Nothing save for its vague humanoid shape was human. Its arms and legs were too long and bony. Its frame appeared too skinny to support its appendages. It appeared to have a rudimentary tail as well. On each of its forelegs had 7 long bony fingers, 2 of which I realized were really one finger that branched off midway down. The fingers were not the typical arrangement, where they sort of make a line on your hand, one after the other along the hand, but rather this thing's fingers seemed to protrude out from a cylindrical stump, and along its neck and head it had a sort of mossy-like mane of hair. The head itself was sort of a rough shape like a coyote's skull, with very bony features and forward-facing eyes. Its mouth consisted of several rows of small, possum-like teeth, visible through its slightly gaping mouth. Its lips seemed to extend all the way down to its neck, with an eerie-looking grin. On its spiny back there were 2 stumps that looked like they may have once been wings or another set of limbs, but they had been amputated. Its eye sockets were huge, yet its eyes were so small and beady, unblinking. They glowed dimly in the reflection of my flashlight. In addition to all of this, there was some kind of creepy aura about it. Everything about it just seemed wrong. It was as if the creature was from a place where the laws of nature and proportions were utterly alien to ours, yet this thing was making a mocking attempt to try and mimic something normal. I just stared at this thing, taking in its features, while at the same time trying to process what it was. Eventually I came to the conclusion that the thing must have been some Halloween decoration that my grandpa was planning on using for some kind of Halloween prank, which I wouldn't put it past him, though I did think it was strange that he would store the decoration in the woods near the farmhouse. Upon determining this, I grinned, and I took out my smartphone and opened up the camera to take a few pictures. I needed to move closer to get it into view. I did not take any more than 2 steps into the tree line before the creature's beady eyes suddenly contracted, seeming to suddenly ignite into life, which made me stop in my tracks. I realized the creature was no prank. It was not a clever decoration. It was a living, breathing creature. A creature that had probably been asleep, and I had just woken it up. Its limbs slowly moved. Then it began to flail them about, sporadically, like it was seizing. I began stepping backwards, unsettled, and somewhat disgusted by the movements. Eventually, one of its hands caught the ground, then the other, and it pushed itself up, showing off its striking height, at about what I guessed to be 9 feet tall. It seemed to strain to keep itself standing. It had a digitigrade stance, not unlike a coyote or dog. It focused its intense gaze, digging its hollow white eyes into my being. The creature let out a low growl that suddenly erupted into a deafening screeching noise that still haunts me to this day. A combination of an elk screaming with a low droning vibrating hum would not be an inaccurate approximation of the screech. Without thinking, I turned around, gulping, and I ran. I took off running faster than I ever have before, sprinting past the barn and was heading to my car that was parked out in front of the house. As I ran, I glimpsed Juno on the back porch, her ears pointing downwards with a worried but sleepy look on her face. "Juno, car!" I barked at her in a panicked gasp. Her ears perked, then she took off passing me with ease as she bolted to the car, beating me by mere seconds. I fumbled for my keys as the creature let out another bone-chilling cry. I dared to look up to see the creature stumbling awkwardly past the barn into the light. Juno gave a nervous whimper when she looked over uneasily at the source of the screech. She looked like she was seriously considering bolting in the opposite direction, but she did not want to abandon her master. I finally found my keys, and I opened the car door. I barely get the door open before she jumped into the driver's seat. I dove in after her, shoving her into the passenger seat. The creature was now at the farmhouse, only about 10 feet from my car, and it was picking up speed, running in a shambling gait. I slammed my keys into the ignition and turned it. Car roared to life, and I threw the gear into drive and floored the accelerator, and I spun the car around as fast as I could, clipping the creature with the tail of my car as it spun around, making a loud thud. The thing let out a screech of pain. Not stopping, I slammed through the front gate with my car and tore onto the gravel road. I stopped to take one more glance back to see the outline of the creature in the darkness, moving around in front of the house. I tore down the road as fast as my car could go. I made it to the nearest inhabited town and found a nicely lit parking lot. I got out of the car to examine the damage to it. There was a decent dent in the front where the car hit the gate. There was also a smaller dent in the rear passenger side where the creature got hit. There were also some scratches in the paint of the trunk of the car. I sat back in the driver's seat and sighed in relief. It was short-lived as a creeping dread suddenly washed over me. I remembered my grandfather was coming in the morning to go fishing. I reached for my phone to call and warn him, only to find my pocket was empty. I cursed at myself, realizing I must have dropped my phone earlier. That meant I would have to return to the farmhouse. I tried to sleep, but it would not come. About a half hour before dawn, I started back with my sullen drive to confront whatever awaited me. I arrived there shortly after the sun started to rise above the horizon, and the creature was nowhere to be seen. Clearly, though, it had been there. I got out of my car and Juno followed, though she did not venture far from my car, clearly frightened. My fishing gear, which I had left out of the barn, was scattered about randomly. My tackle box had strange bite marks on it, like something had bit into it inquisitively. My laptop was totaled, the screen was shattered, and its contents mangled. My telescope was relatively okay, though the USB cord that connected it to my computer had been severed. There were also a few bizarre scratch marks on the house. The oil drum was missing as well, and I could not seem to find my phone, though it may have been near the tree line, but I dare not go towards it. That is when I noticed something that unnerved me. The back door to the house, which I left unlocked, was open. I finished packing up my gear and I put it in my car, trying to delay the possible confrontation of whatever awaited me inside that house. Right as I finished up putting away the last of my gear, I was considering going inside the house when my grandfather's truck pulled into the driveway. For a split second I was overjoyed that I was no longer here by myself. But that joy quickly melted into pure terror. My grandpa, who at the time was 79 years old, with Parkinson's disease, was now in the middle of nowhere with me, miles away from the nearest hospital, but a likely hostile creature that could do who knows what. My grandpa was already pissed off, I could tell by the way his hands were shaking. It was then that I realized that I had forgotten about the front gate, which had been torn off its hinges by my car in my flight. What the hell happened here? Why is my front gate broken? He shouted accusingly. I told him what had happened to the best of my ability, leaving out the exact details of the creature's appearance, save for it being large and clearly hostile. I don't think he would have believed me if I described it to him anyways. I think my grandfather concluded that I must have seen a black bear. In the state that I live, there are no wild bears, black or otherwise. However, one of my grandfather's farm neighbors cared for a black bear which had a tendency to get out and come visit my grandfather's farmhouse, to my grandfather's utter terror. I think this is what he thought I was talking about. Without another word, he went to his truck and pulled out his shotgun, cocked it, and headed for the back door. I went to my car and grabbed my crowbar that I kept in my truck. I ran up to my grandpa, who was now at the top of the back of the porch. "What the?" my grandpa muttered as I got to the top of the porch. He was staring at something inside the open doorway. That's when I saw what my grandpa saw. It was my smartphone hanging from the antlers of a taxidermied deer that was right inside the door, and hanging above the door was the oil drum. It was somehow wedged between the door and the frame like one of those old bucket of water pranks. You know, you open the door and the bucket falls and spills water on your head, only this bucket would probably injure you, if not kill you. All the blood drained away from my face, and my eyes widened with the horrific realization. Had it laid a trap for me? Was it waiting for me to return to investigate, then ambush me? My train of thought was interrupted by Juno's sudden barking. I turned around to see Juno, snarling, hair pricked up and teeth bared, assuming a predatory stance, trying her best to show off how intimidating she could be. I followed her gaze to the tree line, where that creature was, crouching in a similar predatory manner. "What is that thing?" my grandpa said, startled. Not knowing what else to say, I simply responded, "That's the thing from last night." He stood there petrified a few moments, then nodded nervously, seeming to understand my meaning. That thing stood there, staring directly at me for a few more minutes. It opened its mouth, letting its snake-like tongue show, then it slowly receded into the woods. It either decided the appearance of my grandfather made any attack too risky, or we had foiled its trap, and therefore ruined its element of surprise. We stood there a few minutes until my grandpa pulled out his phone, breaking the silence. He called Buck, a massive and powerful man in his 40s, and Grandpa's hired hand. Grandpa told Buck to stop whatever he was doing and come to the farmhouse as soon as possible. When he arrived, I was sent to the barn to find parts and tools to repair the gate, but not before taking a detour to the farmhouse to remove the drum and to grab another shotgun, which Grandpa handed to Buck. Buck seemed confused by this, but didn't ask any questions as he took the gun. Buck and Grandpa stood in front of the barn doors with Juno wagging her tail, shaking with joy of having made a new friend. Buck just stood there and pet her a while. My grandpa watched the tree line, with an alertness that I thought the years had long worn out of him. Eventually, I found what we needed. Buck and I held up the gate as my grandfather replaced the hinges. By the time we had finished, it was high noon, and my grandpa told Buck to never go anywhere without a weapon for a while, handing him the shotgun. Buck nodded affirmatively and got back into his truck and headed back home. "What are you going to do about that thing?" I asked my grandfather. He took a moment as if processing my question. "Ignore it and hope it moves on by the time deer season comes around." "And if it hasn't?" I asked, legitimately wondering what he was planning. He ignored the question. "Let's call it a day," he said. We drove home and have not mentioned the creature to anybody until now. I know my grandpa recently bought a bunch of new deer cams, which I am assuming he tends to use to try and see if the creature is still around. As for me, I don't think I will ever go stargazing out in the country ever again.
I have lived in New Mexico inside the Navajo reservation since I was born. I am 17 now. Since I was a young boy, my grandmother, who worked as a cashier in her own shop, which sold old Navajo relics, would tell me of skinwalkers. She never said anything bad about them. She told me of how her aunt was one and how she would always see an odd-looking deer looking at her through her bedroom window at midnight when she was a young girl. She said its eyes were pure black and it wouldn't move. She once tried to wave at it, and when she did, she said, it rose up on its hind legs and walked towards my window. She could hear the crunching of leaves and branches get louder and closer as it approached the window. Her bed was right next to it. She got scared and pulled the very thin sheets over her head. The moonlight seemed to cast a shadow of the deer on her sheets. She lay there, trembling in fear, as she saw what seemed to be hands of the shadow scratch at the window. When she was telling me that part of the story, she very quietly said, "They were not hooves, they were hands, fingers. This deer had hands." It began to scratch more at her window. She saw its long, disgusting nails through her very thin sheets. All of a sudden, she heard whispering saying, "Open the window," in Navajo. The deer thing's shadow started to become something else, she said, while she heard it cracking and snapping of what she said had to be bones. Not a deer anymore, but she saw a person in the window. She peeked through her sheets in an instant and said she saw a very ugly old lady staring at her with the same eyes the deer had, pure black. She said it reminded her of death. She didn't move an inch until finally this old lady trotted back into the forest. And that deer never came back, but my grandma said there was always a deer that would follow her home from school, right to the edge of the tree line. So this is where my story begins. I was that stupid little boy that would always go outside and be up to no good. I would climb trees, throw rocks in the river. I wouldn't go inside until my grandma made me. I would always run through the forest in my backyard by myself. I would see the occasional deer, so I would run at it to spook it off. Until one day, I saw a deer. It was a large deer with a shaggy-looking hide. It hadn't seen me, so I sneakily came up behind it. I was only a few feet away when it suddenly turned its head to me. It had pure black eyes, dead eyes. We stared at each other for what seemed like hours in my head. It then stood up on its hind legs and ran off into the thick forest, faster than I've ever seen a deer run. The disturbing part was the ear-splitting screech it sent out as it galloped into the forest. I quickly ran home. I didn't want to go into the forest anymore. I lived in a house that was held up, which meant it had a crawl space. Small animals like possums like to hide there sometimes, so I would never go down there. One night, when I was on my bed doing my homework, I heard a scratching on the floor of my room, coming from that crawl space. This had never happened before. This scratching came from the floor beneath my bed. I, the stupid kid I was, got a broomstick and smacked the wooden floor 3 times as hard as I could. Suddenly, this scratching stopped. For a couple of seconds, I sighed in relief before I heard 3 slow thuds beneath my bed. Whatever it was making the scratching noises copied me. It then began pounding on the floor. I felt my bed shake very slightly with each coming thud. I stopped moving. The fear hit me all at once, and I lay there on my bed sobbing until it stopped. A couple of moments later, after it stopped, I saw through a crack in the shutters of my window a disheveled-looking man crawl out from under my house and run off into the tree line. Every night after that, I hear whispers coming from under my floorboards, faint scratching and pounding, and I see the same shifty coyote hiding in the darkness of my crawl space. I see those same eyes and the same eerie orange glow. I am scared for my life. I needed to tell this story because no one I know believes me. This has been a bizarre summer. I had several encounters with mysterious creatures, some extremely terrifying. I worked at a Boy Scout camp, and there have been rumors of spirits that patrolled the nature trails on the far side of the camp. One night after work, me and two coworkers, Steve and Jim, decided to walk the trails at midnight. We were about halfway through the trail when Jim told us to stop and listen. It sounded like something was gnawing on bones and tearing at flesh. We shone our flashlights around us to see what remained of a deer, but the ribcage was torn open, almost flattened. Viscera were scattered across the forest floor, and the skull was crushed, and we could still hear the noises. Steve told us that we should get out of there, but we pressed on deeper into the forest. Suddenly, Jim stopped in front of us, and I asked him what was up, and he just pointed his light ahead. About 20 yards away, we saw this thing. It crouched with its back behind us, tearing into what we believe was a piece of the deer. It stopped and slowly rose, standing almost 10 feet tall, and it dropped whatever it was eating and turned around. Its face was nothing but skull, but not that of a human. It looked more like a deer's skull. Its arms were long and lanky, ending in large claws. Jim screamed, and we all began to run. The creature let out a horrifying screech behind us, and I made the mistake of turning around. The thing was on all fours and charging right at us, breaking smaller trees and stumps as it ran. Even as we got off the trail, we continued to run. And finally we stopped as we got to the pool building. We slammed the door and collected ourselves, but I could hear something outside. I looked through the window, and this creature was standing under a light post, breathing slowly. After a few horrifying moments, it slowly stepped away, disappearing back into the darkness. That wasn't the last we saw of this thing. A couple of days later, it was me and two other lifeguards, Colin and Maya, who were sitting in the office as a thunderstorm ravaged the camp. We watched the rain when a flash of lightning showed us something standing on the other side of the pool fence. Maya shrieked as the beast appeared. It looked to be walking towards the lake. I watched it walk away until I lost it in the pouring rain. The next morning, we found that the geese that lived near the lake were killed. It took us about an hour to clean up the mess. The next encounter was the next to last week of camp, and this was honestly the most terrifying experience of all. It was a Wednesday night, and I traveled the nature trail alone. Some morbid part of me wanted to see the thing again. And then I heard something. Someone was laughing at me, and it sounded like it was close. I turned and knew what I would see. It was the creature again. The thing with the deer skull for a head. Already regretting my terrible decision, I ran. I heard what sounded like the brush behind me crushing as something gave chase. After a painful eternity, I stopped to catch my breath, but the sounds of crushing brush only drew closer, so I forced myself to keep running until I once again locked myself in the pool office. I was terrified. Then I heard something ram into the door. I could see it through the window, and I heard what sounded like another person. But it was coming from this thing. Eventually, it must have gotten tired because it walked back into the woods. A few uneventful nights later, we had planned a campout. I was very apprehensive about this idea, but I decided to join the others because I did not want to be alone. The night passed by quietly for me, and I woke up peacefully, only to hear weird stories from the campers from the previous night. Someone said that they heard the tent flaps open. They could hear breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, but they were too afraid to turn. Now, this could have been anyone, so I wasn't concerned too much about the story. Until he said he heard laughter. That was the last I heard of the thing from the forest. Still though, some dark part of me wants to go back, wants to return to find it again.
This took place on a nice November night in 2015. We were home alone. My house is your average two-story home, with me and my brother Jeff's bedrooms on the second floor of the house. I know it's not haunted, but that doesn't make this experience any less terrifying. My name is Mia, and I was 12 when this occurred. I have long blonde hair that goes down past my shoulders to my chest, and I have blue eyes. On this night I was wearing a tank top and short shorts. I was home alone with Jeff, who looks like a rugby player, but he takes medicine because of his ADHD, and he can get aggressive if he forgets to take it. He was 13 at the time. I had two of my friends sleeping over with me. I will call them Josie, who's 12, and Gwen, who's also 12. It was about 8:30 at night. I was making popcorn to watch a movie while my friends were in my bedroom waiting for me to start the movie. Jeff had kicked us out of the lounge. For those who care, the movie was pitch perfect, and I was pretty pumped to watch it with my friends. We were about 45 minutes into the movie. I was really enjoying it, and I'm sure my friends were too. But I needed to go to the toilet really bad. So I paused the movie. Then I told my friends that I had to go. I opened my bedroom door, went to the upstairs toilet. I did my business. When I was done and washed my hands, I decided that I may as well get a drink of water too. I went downstairs to the kitchen to get my water. I got my cup and filled it halfway. I downed it, and I was going to go up the stairs when I thought I would check on Jeff. I hadn't heard him say anything since I could remember. It was unusually quiet. I walked down the hallway that led to the front door, which branched off into the lounge. I turned into the lounge room and saw that Jeff was gone, but the TV was still on. This made me feel uneasy. I figured that he had just gone to his room, but that made no sense. If that was the case, I would have heard him go up the stairs. They were really noisy and creaked when you walked up or down them, and at the very least, he would have turned off the TV. After this thought went through my mind, I kind of freaked out. Where was he? And are my friends okay? I went upstairs in a quick dash and went through my bedroom door. To my relief, my friends were still there, and they asked me what was up. I told them that Jeff was gone. Then I asked them if they heard Jeff go into his bedroom. They said that they hadn't seen or heard anything, so I thought he wasn't there. I told them I was going to check his room. I went down to the corridor and stood in front of his bedroom door. I opened the door and I saw a silhouette. I was about to turn on the light, but I heard Jeff say, "Don't, why are you in here? You didn't knock, get out." This was Jeff's usual excuse, so I listened and I backed up while saying, "I'm sorry, I just wanted to see if you were okay." I went back to my bedroom telling my friends that Jeff was in his room. Gwen and Josie said that that is not right, since they didn't hear any noise. While we were talking about how Jeff got in his room, we all heard the front door open. Curious, I looked at my phone. It was now 10:37 at night. My parents shouldn't be back yet. Then I noticed that whoever it was in the house was panting. Being scared that there was an intruder in the house, me, Gwen, and Josie went downstairs and called for Jeff. We heard him say breathlessly, "I think someone's in our backyard." We asked him why he thought that, and he said that he heard me calling his name. We were already looking at him in shock. I hadn't called for him, not to mention that I saw him in his room just a few seconds ago, so how had he just come in through the front door? I asked him why he was outside. He said that he needed to go to the toilet, but I was in the bathroom at the time, so he went outside. He opened the back sliding door and did his thing, and once he was done, he started heading back inside when he heard me call his name. He looked all over for me, he said, but he couldn't find me. And when he heard my voice again, it sounded like a whisper, and the tone was so off. Jeff said that he started to get cold, but he continued to look around the backyard while advancing towards the back door, but it was now locked. He heard a snap in the bushes and looked in the direction. He thought he saw some shadow humanoid figure. He felt as though it was looking at him, and in his own words, he said its presence felt evil. After staring at it thinking he was going mad, he rubbed his eyes, then took another look, and it was out of the bush and walking towards him. He backed up, but the silhouette said in my voice, "Jeff, I need your help," which I say a lot since he is good at many things that I'm not good at. After this, he booked it over our gate leading to the front yard, sprinting at full speed, and that's when he opens the front door. We asked what to do, but Jeff wanted to check his room to see if anything was in there. First, he grabbed his baseball bat from the lounge. Then we all marched up the stairs together like a scared riot, and we opened Jeff's door. We turned on the light and saw nothing, except that his bedroom window was open. At this, we were all terrified, including Jeff. It appeared to be closed when I was in there about 7 minutes ago, talking to the fake Jeff. So even if I did imagine Jeff talking to me, it does not explain how the window suddenly opened. We called our parents, and they didn't believe us, so they didn't come home any earlier, despite how afraid we all were. Nothing else happened that night, but this experience had me thinking, was it a skinwalker? I always loved the stories and creepypastas of unexplainable creatures, but honestly, I always doubted the paranormal existed, until this event. I'm a 14-year-old guy who lives in the ghetto who never really respected the authority until July 4th of 2016. I was chilling with my friends, Carlitos and the Travius, that night, and they never respected authority either. We were always in trouble. We smoked weed and drank lean, and had weapons on us a lot, sometimes even guns that we bought from the guys in the trap house. We were hanging out at Carlitos' house when we decided to have some fun, and we all decided to go car hopping. We were just walking towards a parked car when I heard Travius yell, "Hey, Tyler! You saw that over there?" He was pointing towards the gas station that borders the ghetto from the woods. I said no. We looked around for more cars that seemed easy to get into. When I got the feeling of being watched, I turned around, ready to draw my gun. When I did, I saw a hairless creature with long arms and claws. The thing was white as snow. I yelled and drew my gun pointing at the thing. Travius and Carlitos turned around and saw it as well. It looked at the three of us with a sinister face. The three of us looked at each other, all wielding guns. The thing moved slowly towards us when I pulled the trigger. My friends did the same. We must have fired all of our rounds when the thing screamed, and that's when we all ran. I turned my head around to see if we were being followed. And we were. This thing was fast, easily catching up to us. We ran straight towards the Travius' house, because his was the closest. Well, by closest I mean 10 blocks away. We decided we wanted to get there alive, and the fastest way was to jump through people's yards. As we did, I heard screaming. The scream sounded so inhuman. It sounded like someone was in pain. We didn't look back. We kept going until we got to Travius' house. And when we did, we locked the doors and grabbed Travius' dad's AK and stayed up all night waiting to fire at that thing. Fortunately, we must have lost it, because we didn't see it again that night. But we did get into a lot of trouble for trying to use Travius' dad's gun. To this day, we never go down that road. Ever.
This event happened about 4 years ago. It was a summer night. My friends, let's call them Daniel and Andrew, and I were playing a game of Nerf War out of my 5.5 acres. I was hiding in the forest that my family owned, holding my Nerf swords in my hands, and a one-shot pistol in my back pocket. I heard Daniel start up his automatic Nerf gun nearby me. I crouched behind my tree, leaning in to try to see him. I hear movement closer to me now, yet the movement was from behind me, while the sound of the powered Nerf gun was in front of me. I thought I was cornered, so I spun around. There was no one there. I jumped out, signaling Daniel to go silent. He stopped his gun and stepped up to me. What is it?" I heard him whisper to me. I asked him to go get Andrew, and he walked off. I pulled out my pocket knife that I always had on me. I began walking towards where I heard that movement. The sound was still coming, and it sounded like it was coming from the only large limber pine, and on the other side of it. Now, I thought it was going to be a raccoon. I was hoping it wasn't a bear, but what I found was much worse. As I was slipping around the tree to try and find what it was, I heard 2 heavy, fast footsteps coming up to me. I knew that it was Andrew and Daniel, so I threw up the sign to go quiet, and then motioned them to come over to me. Apparently, they saw that I had my knife out, so they pulled out theirs as well. They both looked a bit nervous. We started making our way around the tree, and when we got near where the sound was, Daniel stopped abruptly. Soon after, Andrew did the same. I turned around and followed their gaze up to one of the highest branches of the tree. What I saw shocked me. It was large, about 7 feet tall, with clawed fingers, and was bone-thin as if it never ate. It also had fur on its arms and legs, but nowhere else. It was scratching at the tree as if trying to get something. I heard a bird chirp after what seemed like an eternity, and this thing stopped. Then it turned around to where the bird chirped. I saw it open its mouth and heard it mimic the cry. It was off. almost as if the sound was cried from one end of a tunnel, and I was hearing it from the other side. I heard a gasp, and too late, I realized that I was the one that gasped. The thing shut its mouth, and it starts to look around, trying to pinpoint where the sound came from. The three of us threw ourselves against the bottom of the tree, trying to hide from it. I dropped my knife on the ground, but I didn't care at the moment. I could hear the creature starting to move down the tree, and I heard it hit the tree on the other side of where we were. I was too scared to try anything, and my friends were petrified as well. I heard the thing breathe, and then, "Where are you?" I heard a distorted voice from the other side of the tree, but I could make it out to be my own. I did not want to move. I was looking for a way out of there, but what would the thing do if we made a break for it? My eyes fell on my knife, out in the open directly in front of me. I knew there was absolutely no way I could try my luck on stabbing this thing, especially with how long its arms were and how fast it moved. I heard it moving around the tree, and I decided, if I died, at least my friends had a chance. I lunged at my knife, turned around from the tree, only to face myself. I screamed, almost by instinct, and I lunged forward with the knife. I missed. The thing was fast. It stumbled backwards, made the most blood-curdling scream, and dashed off into the woods. I stood there in silence, dazed by the shout that I even survived this, and saw my friends get up holding their knives. We gathered our stuff and went home, and I told my parents what had happened. My dad went back and checked out the property, but of course, to no avail. I haven't seen the thing since, but it seemed to be something right from a nightmare. I faintly remember this story from a very trusted family friend who swears to God it was true, and he had multiple witnesses to back him up. So here goes. My friend, let's call him John, is currently 19 years old and was going deep into a barren field to shoot some guns with friends. John is a firm believer in paranormal creatures such as Wendigos, Skinwalkers, and witches, so you can imagine that he was terrified to go to this field, which was supposedly a breeding ground for Wendigo sightings. After they were done shooting, they went to the car to head out, but the car simply would not start. They called up their mutual friends to see what was wrong. About a half hour later, they arrive and quickly come to the realization that the car would need more than just a simple jump start. They didn't have long until nightfall, and the only guy with the phone had used up all of his battery life. So their only chance was to get in the car with their friends and leave the other car behind so they could find a mechanic willing to follow them to their car. They just could not leave the car overnight. Now, this part of the story I could tell that John was visibly shaken. Since they didn't have room for the dog that they brought along with them, they decided to leave him in the back seat and leave the AC on. After their trip, they came back to the piece of junk car, but they could not find the dog. Eventually, they discovered him trembling under the back seats. It was obvious he had no plan on coming out. Now, John had known this dog before, and he had never seen him frightened, so that made the situation much more sinister and weird. He then looked into the distance to see a white horse in a part of the field where the grass was particularly tall. Now this is the part to this day I cannot explain. The horse. It wasn't what a regular horse would look like. No, they started to realize this horse was oddly human-shaped. And before saying a word, John saw with his own eyes this horse. I don't know how to explain this. It was almost shrinking, turning into what looked like a bony, thin dog. Out of every part of this that really disturbed me, even John, who I thought to be fearless, had an empty look in his eyes as if the events were playing in his head over and over again. The so-called dog stood up on its hind legs and ran off. They did not care how far away the creature was, or even that it ran off. They picked up their dog and ran for the car, and never have they drone out of anywhere that fast before. To this day, John refuses to go back to those fields.